everyone. I'm joined today with my friend Samantha Salmon. She has a website called rawfoodmealplanner.com. I was really impressed with what she's doing, and so much of her story kind of parallels my story with diabetes in the family. And I think she will definitely inspire you when you hear her story. Sam, if you could take us back to the beginning before your journey started, because I know your grandmother was sick, and I'd like the audience to hear about that.
Yes, my grandma was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And, before she was diagnosed, she was mobile. She looked like a normal size according to what I'm used to in my community. She looked like a regular, normal sized person. But when she got diagnosed, uh, a lot of things went wrong. Like she got all the co-conditions basically because she had to take about like 17 to 19 pills a day. She was taking the metformin, the glucophage, the Plavix, all the all the pills.
Was she on
And
insulin as well?
she wasn't in the beginning. She just had
Oh,
to check her finger every morning.
mhm.
And that was for a few years. But with the meds, her whole body swole up. Her stomach
Yeah.
was huge. And I would say definitely just visually, you could call her obese at that point. But her obesity did not, I don't feel it started from the diet, but it started from the meds, in
Right.
my opinion. But this
Right.
is also coming from the perspective of I was a child at the time. So I can't remember the exact year she was diagnosed, but I was, old enough to know things. So probably like fifth grade. I was in fifth grade or
Mhm.
something like this. And so, it was basically the regular with her. Like my entire childhood was like being a nurse for her, because she had
Right.
to eat at certain times and she had all those pills she had to take. She was on a schedule with those pills and the meals coordinated with that. Um, and because of her diagnosis, she couldn't eat certain things according to the nutritionist and stuff. So when she was diagnosed, my mom was asked to go to a nutrition class, or was given the opportunity to, which she was really interested in because
Mhm.
we were always like a somewhat health conscious family. My mom and I, we would exercise a lot together. When I was young, we used to do Pilates and stuff in the living room. So she was somewhat health conscious, but it was basically like the mainstream health conscious, more into
Yeah.
like fitness and stuff. She was a cosmetologist. She owned a hair salon. So she, was into like the body.
Right.
So when my grandma was diagnosed, all the notes that she learned from the nutritionist came back home, and she was busy. She owned a business, she had staff, she had a husband, two kids. And my brother is 11 years older than me. His appetite is like, whoa.
Yep.
He's like 6'4", growing boy, so he eats a lot. And then my grandma, was always with us, so because she lived with us. So it wasn't, my mom wasn't about to make different meals for everybody. She only made a batch of food for all of us to share. So the changes she was making for grandma, we all basically went on those changes, with the exception of some things that she purchased from Costco, with two kitchens and all these folks to feed. Costco was a regular, you go
Yep.
and get the
Yep.
cases of stuff. So I was eating all the home cooked meals that included meat, and dairy. I was lactose intolerant at the time, but until I drank Lactaid. But I still ate pizza pockets. I ate taquitos, all of those things. There was
Yeah.
no connection that was made to me. No one told me that, oh, if you're lactose intolerant, you can't eat,
Yeah. They
cheese
don't
and
tell
things
you
like
that. Right. Yeah. They don't tell
yeah,
you
it
that.
was just like Lactaid. You drink Lactaid. Um, and yeah, so we had these things, and then my grandma had the home cooked meals. We all had these home cooked meals. And so things were going along for a while. I got into my dream school, NYU, because I'm from New York.
Yep.
And that was like the only thing I ever wanted. And I remember this is 2000, I can't remember because I applied early decision. So I'm not sure
Mhm.
at what year you do that, but I remember running to my grandma to celebrate with her
Oh,
about this thing. We celebrated together because grandma was always home. She was sick, she wasn't mobile. So I really spent most of my childhood with her, in comparison
yeah.
to my parents who worked, who owned businesses. They were busy working. Our day together collectively as a family was Sunday. But besides that, it was, my grandma. So around that time, so I get into my dream school. And after I start school now, I'm in college, my first year. It was probably like a little bit before then or after then that her she needed insulin, right? Her pancreas was
Mhm.
not making enough now at this point. Because before she was just pricking the finger, taking the pills, and eating the food. And now she had to start getting injections into her stomach with insulin. It was these long needles. And I'm telling you, to this day, I cannot do needles and I can't do
I know, I
pills.
can't even imagine. I always say that to other people. I can't imagine what it's like to be type 1. I give them a lot of
Yeah.
credit because I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was horrible because I felt like, honestly, my entire childhood, I felt like I was watching my grandma be a human pincushion for the medical system. She was always being poked and prodded with needles, you know?
Now,
Um,
did you have to give her the injections or did she do
I
it
never, no,
herself?
I could never,
No.
I could never,
Yeah. Yeah.
I could never be a nurse. I could never because the needles, I'm telling you, I just needles and pills I cannot do. I can't take, I can't look. I can't look.
Yeah.
It does something to
Yeah.
my entire nervous system. I just
I hear
cannot.
you. Yeah.
And
So you had a nurse that came over or?
so no, so at that point she started to have a in-home nurse's aide because
Mhm.
I was, between like my last year of high school and going into college now, I'm busy. My mom is busy. Someone needed to be home with her. And so we started to have this extra support. So the in-home nurse aide would apply this, but she wasn't even on that for long because that was like a few months. And then her big toe turned black. I was the
Oh,
first
wow.
one to
Yeah.
notice it and
Mhm.
call attention to it. And I'm telling you, it was like every time I talk about it, I get emotional because the fear in my heart of what that meant when I saw it, right? Because
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
who has a loved one with type 2 diabetes, or if you have it, like that's the worst thing you could see because
Exactly.
typically it means amputation.
Mhm.
But for my grandmother, she never got the chance for amputation because it was within 2 weeks that she was home on hospice care and then passed away.
Oh,
And
wow.
while she was home on hospice care, in the living room on a gurney, hooked up to a catheter, I mean, that, like, we all know she's going to pass, right? So at the time, my grandma had 8 children. I'm from Jamaican ancestry. She's from rural Jamaica, right? So if you think of Jamaica, there are rural areas of Jamaica, country, where her husband had a sugarcane farm, but he got sick, and that's how she ended up having to, financially provide for the family and come over here and all this stuff. But all her children and their kids. So at the time, she had 8 kids, 17 grandchildren, and a great grand. And everyone came, to
Mhm.
give their last words. And like that time of my life I was just in tears all the time. Like I just had like tunnel vision, not wanting to talk to anybody, just like
Of course. Yeah.
in grief, couldn't believe what was going on and how quick everything was happening,
What year was
And
that? Like 2001 or
it was
so?
2004.
Okay.
It was close to Thanksgiving because I remember I was home working on schoolwork because midterms were coming up.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, my grandma's in the living room yelling, screaming in pain because the catheter is burning her. She's on whatever, because once you're on hospice care, they have like, they give you like palliative care. So just to make you feel as comfortable as possible. But you know, all her organs were shutting down and failing. And
Oh,
you know, my mom had to basically give her permission to let go, which is understandable because
mhm.
she had all these family members. Like we were such, and that's why, you know, I've been trying to reflect back why, like at this point, it's been almost 20 years since she's been gone. Why do I still cry about it? But it was the most, and I've been through hard times, but that was
Yeah,
the most hurtful and traumatic period, an experience I've ever gone through. And also not just watching someone you love and who is, you think is just so amazing,
yeah,
go through such a long, drawn out, painful death, you know?
yeah,
But also what it did to our family, because she was the matriarch, she was the glue. And her birthday is on Christmas. So every Christmas, everyone would come over and celebrate in our home. It was full of such love and joy and warmth. And then when she passed, we have not been the same, you know?
I'm sure. Yeah, Christmas has got to be tough. I'm sure,
Yeah.
especially, yeah, yeah. I,
Yeah. So it's probably like the biggest pivotal moment of my life, because you know, growing up first generation Jamaican American, uh I had a view of what I wanted to do with my life, which was international economic development. I was very like upset about, you know, IMF and World Bank and currency exchanges and
yeah,
all this. But then watching what happened to my grandma and like having the insight at that time that food is not worth it, not only what it did to her body and her experience in life, um but also what it did to our family, you know, to watch her go out like that, you know. um and you know, she died in her 80s, but now we know how to survive and thrive until like 120, you know what I'm saying? So
exactly.
as far
Yeah,
as I'm concerned, 40 years were ripped away from us of having her influence in our lives, you know.
yeah.
um but
And plus
I
her quality of life too toward the end was so bad, and that could have possibly been avoided too. So yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
because
yeah.
like I say, and that's why I emphasize, you know, her body went through change on these medications. She was on the medications for such a long time. No
Hmm.
one told us. It wasn't until years later, you know, that I found Dr. Neil Barnard's book, his program on reversing type 2 diabetes, where he talks
Yes,
about how the food is told to you to eat to manage diabetes is really to manage the medications, you know, to
exactly.
keep you on the meds. And eventually your kidneys and your liver, it has to process all of these toxic chemicals, and eventually they just give out. It's like time's up on this, you know.
Yep,
And it doesn't have to be that way. You can reverse it. Had we been told this, you know, just like we
exactly,
took direction before, you know, we would have taken direction to reverse, but we were never told. And this is why
exactly.
I'm
Yep.
just so passionate about informed consent. You know,
Yes,
give
hundred
people
percent
the
agree.
option, you
Hundred
know,
percent
because some
agree.
of
Yep,
us, like some of us are going through hard times and are not mentally, haven't made the click to make the change, but we were making changes
yep,
based off of
exactly.
what we knew and what we were being told, you know.
Yep.
Um, we
One thing
fought
I
for
was
her
curious
life.
about, with what you were saying, it made me think, was she responding to the meds in the beginning, and did it just deteriorate after that, or were her blood sugars always out of control, just during
Sometimes
the
it
meds?
was, sometimes, you know, there were times we had to call the ambulance, like a few times actually. um Quite frequent enough, you know, call 911, and she would have stints in the hospital and come back. It was like a regular
Yeah,
thing. But for the most part, I mean, we were doing all the stuff, you know, you check the blood sugar and that tells you like, okay, you can eat this, can't eat that, the medicine, you know, all this. And I wasn't too
yeah,
much involved with all of the details and minutia of that. Um, but the pills she had to take every day, the testing she had to do every day, every day. And so she was being watched and monitored between my mom, between the home health aides. She had, daily hands-on assistance,
Yeah. Yeah.
but if she had to go from that to insulin injections, clearly she went from producing insulin to not producing enough insulin.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
you know
And after that many years, I mean, it makes sense, unfortunately.
yeah.
Yeah. So, was it Dr. Bernard that led you to the plant-based diet, or was it other things as well?
um well, okay, so that was freshman year of college. Fast forward senior year, I get married, I moved to the Bay Area, and you know this is the first time I'm living with my husband, and I'm making him a meal for the first time. And it was a meal that my mom used to make that I really liked, which was honey glazed chicken, which, I wasn't really a cook as a child. I was a baker. So making this was a huge deal. It was a lot of work, to prepare the
Yeah.
chicken and make sure it's not full of bacteria and fat. My mom was huge on the fat thing, because when my grandma was diagnosed, that was one of the things that she really was doing on a regular basis, is cutting fat off the meat and then showing me the amount of fat she was taking off the meat. It was quite disgusting, but every time she did it, she had to show me it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'm trying to make this meal. I call my mom for directions and assistance, and I turn to my husband and say, "Hey, dinner's ready." And then he tells me he's not going to eat it because he's vegan. And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, be vegan tomorrow because I just slaved over this dish, you know?" And then he brought me over to kind of to show me some videos and explain like what is vegan. I don't think I was aware of the term, at
Yeah.
that point, before this point, while my grandma was alive, my cousin had stopped eating meat because he had stomach issues, and I used to make fun of him all the time. I was like, "Yo, if it don't have chicken, it ain't a meal." I used to say that all the time and give him a hard time. And he never really tried to convince anyone or try to really explain. He just wasn't
Mhm.
eating meat because, his stomach. And also I had a nanny. So at a certain point, one of my grandma's best friends came to help support the household. And she's also from Jamaica. She was born in 1917, the oldest person I had ever met in my life. And
Yeah.
she outlived my grandmother. She was a pescatarian. And I knew, like, coming from a Jamaican background, we're aware of Rastas who have an Ital lifestyle. They don't eat any animal product at all. But the term vegan, I had never heard.
Mhm.
And it's not something I ever thought to do, to be honest. I never
Right.
thought to do. But then my husband showed me these videos, and there was one in particular that made so much sense to me, especially after I had witnessed an experience up until that point. And it was this lecturer, I think he was an anthropologist, and he was talking about our intestines as humans and
Mhm.
how they're very different from carnivores. And that's why we are getting disease, because our intestines are long and windy, and meat and these different foods are getting stuck in the
Yeah, they
crevices
stay
and
there. Yeah.
calcifying.
Yep.
Yeah. And whereas a carnivore eats meat, it goes in one end and just comes out the other, and he's making all sorts of distinctions that, like, in my head, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. But then after that video, when I found Dr. Neil Barnard's book, is when I was like, oh, okay,
Then
yeah,
you got it. Yeah.
I can't do this anymore. I wasn't concerned at the time about like stomach cancer or anything. It was just like, oh, this logically makes sense why you wouldn't eat meat. But this thing, because I noticed myself now, I am motivated by fear.
Yeah.
I do not want to experience the life my grandma did.
I'm the same way. I totally get that. Yep.
Yeah, I do not.
Absolutely.
I'm not in a position to swallow all them pills. I struggle with swallowing pills. I cannot, and I don't like pain. So when I read that book, I was like, oh, okay. You know, I went through a series of emotions reading that book because I felt really angry at the medical system,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, for not letting us know, like you killed, that's how I felt. I was like, you murdered my grandmother by not telling us the right information. But then, you know, as years have gone by and lots of therapy
Yeah.
and work in the field, you know, there is, you know, it's possible these folks just didn't know.
True.
Which is why I love what Physicians Committee and Plantrician Project and some of these other groups are doing to educate folks in the field. Because it's heartbreaking what's happening. And it's not just my grandma, but it's the people that she helped bring into this world. I'm looking at my cousins dying early, folks who've basically given up on life because
Yeah.
they're dealing with such traumatic experiences to their body. And, you know, I'm over here saying one thing and I'm younger. These folks have seen me in diapers. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yep.
you know, while I've helped clients and making an impact in this area, there are folks in my family who just cannot see me beyond little Sam they know crawling around, right? And they're interacting with these doctors, and the doctors are not talking about how nutrition can completely reverse what they're dealing with, you know?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it feels to me like it feels criminal to me that this information is not being shared with them. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
The consequences of this is just, it's heartbreaking because I know, because I am experiencing it. Like I had this experience almost 20 years ago with my grandma, but I'm still going through stuff
Yeah.
now with people in their 40s. You
Yep.
understand? My
Yep.
cousins. And
Yep.
so this is why the work that you're doing and all of us in the field is so critical, because it needs to be, we need to get to a tipping point where
Exactly.
everyone is aware of the potential of fruits and vegetables. You know, the
Yep.
foods that they can purchase at the grocery store can be life or death, you know?
Hmm. This education is so important. I don't talk about this much, but you know, you made me think about it. My mom, she reversed her diabetes, but a few years ago, she had a urinary tract infection, ended up in the hospital, and yeah, she had to go to a rehab place to recover. And
Mhm.
they treated her because they looked at her notes that she was diabetic, because it still said that in the notes. And they were checking her blood sugar, and I found out they put her on insulin once, which was insane because she had already reversed it. Her blood sugar was normal, her A1C was normal. And so they were clueless. They just saw it on the chart. And she was given some of their bad foods there because they would never even talk about plant-based in any of those facilities. So,
Mhm.
you know, she's given all this bad food, and you know, her it responded negatively. It wasn't until she was released and on her own again that you know, she reversed her diabetes completely. But you know, it's just, you made me think of that because it's so important to educate, and people just aren't aware.
Yeah, yeah, and being empowered, because I remember my brother saying to me, because I have, you know, out of the fear of losing loved ones, you know, we tend to act a little bit overpowering sometimes. You know, when you learn, you just want other people to like,
Yes.
you got to eat this way, you know, you
Yep.
just got to do
Yep.
it, you know.
Yep.
And so I've had, you know, some interesting experiences and conversations with family members. And I remember one day, like, I can't remember if this was like I think this was actually around the death of my cousin, who was 41, 40, 41.
Oh, so young.
And you know, we're all gathered, food is purchased, there's family there, and my brother, he's such a joker, you know, and he starts making jokes about, you know, smoothies or something like this. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I start yelling at him, not my best moment, you know,
Right.
you know, I start yelling at him. And I remember him saying to me, like, how am I going to tell the doctor you know, he's the doctor. He went to school and blah, blah,
But not
blah, you
not
know?
for
And
nutrition.
I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, you know, I just, I understood in that moment that he's having struggle wrapping his head around how, like, a doctor not knowing this, you know?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it, in my head, it's like, I already know that. So it's like, I just see it as like injustice, like grave injustice. And to him, in his mind, I'm clearly wrong because the doctor's wearing a white coat and went to school and, you know,
Yeah.
and so, you know, I have compassion now because I realize, like, you know, and there's a few books I've read about how we got to a place where the medical establishment was held on this high pedestal and other holistic practitioners were kind of demoted in their place in society in terms of
Mhm.
validity. And, you know, it was a concerted effort because there was a time when you would have a herbalist and all these other people along with doctors basically looked at on the same level, you know.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was none
yeah,
higher. But there's been a lot of massaging of our how we think about things with, you know, not just marketing and positioning, but also legal structure and
right.
the capitalistic structure, how all of that has worked to bring us to this place, social engineering, basically,
Yep.
where there's a lot of mindsets we have to change. And it starts with education. Like, you have to be your own advocate, because if you're not, you put yourself at risk of becoming a victim of the
Yep.
system. And it's
Yep.
not because your doctor necessarily is not well intentioned, but ignorance is ignorance, you know?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, just like it's outside of my scope of practice to diagnose, you know, I wouldn't diagnose someone. You know, I would send you to your doctor to get a diagnosis. They have all the tools and things like this. It is really outside the scope of practice for a doctor to give nutritional advice when they have no knowledge. They
Exactly.
haven't studied. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Exactly.
even like on WebMD, I see they have articles about certain herbs that they're saying, oh, stay away from these herbs. It's going to
I know.
damage your liver.
I know what you're talking
And
about.
I'm
Yeah.
like, word, it's going to damage my liver. These herbs have been life saving for me. Like, you
Exactly.
know what I'm saying?
Yep.
You have all
Yep.
these people on the standard American diet getting colds. You know, I used to get a cold 4 times a year.
I know.
Thank
Me
God
too. Yeah.
for neem and white willow bark. I don't have to take Advil anymore for menstrual cramps. We have white willow bark. I mean, like, our ancestors knew this stuff worked. They were using it. Like in Jamaica, my mom literally was healed. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for herbs, community, and spirituality, right? She
Yep.
had a healing
Yep.
experience with all of these things. We use these things. Why? Because where they grew up, they were far from doctors, first of all. And secondly, at that time in Jamaica, they didn't have all the chemicals that America has. You know, we could
Right. Right.
debate who's better, who's wrong, but people are able to heal themselves. The only reason we've lasted so long, we have all these generations down the line, is because obviously our ancestors knew something, right? If
Yep.
they were eating toxic chemicals, how are we here talking to each other? You know?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's like, I mean, it's just crazy, you know, when you
Yeah.
get into the weeds of it. But yeah, that's
Well,
why I'm
you
a
and I
lot
both
more
probably
peace.
wouldn't listen to a doctor if they, gave us bad nutrition advice. That's the difference between us and other people. We have the knowledge now, and
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why I had to go with a plant-based doctor, because a few years ago, one of my doctors says, "You mean you don't even eat fish or eggs?" And I thought, well, that's it. I got to find somebody else.
Yeah.
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 I mean, once you have the knowledge, I'm sure you're the same way. You're not gonna take their bad advice about nutrition.
Yeah. And even like you were saying about assumptions, because I did go to a doctor for like a checkup. And it was a new doctor because I'm not in the medical system like that. So I don't have a doctor, you know.
Right.
And this guy said, oh, you're black. you might be at risk for type 2 diabetes. Did you need this test and this? And I'm like, no, sir, I'm pretty sure I don't have type 2 diabetes. Like,
Exactly.
literally, that's not why I'm here,
Yep, exactly.
But he was pretty adamant. And, I understand that they're concerned, and they have these concerns,
Right.
folks, and there are definitely folks that they don't take action unless they get these screenings, which
Yeah,
I
and
think
to
is,
his credit, there's probably a higher rate because it's in your genes, or especially
but that
you
part
know
is ludicrous. It's not
right.
in my
I
genes.
mean, he doesn't ask your diet, you know what I mean? I mean,
That's what I'm saying. It's
if he asked
like,
you about your diet, then he'd understand that you wouldn't be if he had
right.
any
And
knowledge at
he,
all. Yeah.
and I did mention that to him, and he was like, oh, he kind of dismissed that and was just
Uh-huh.
staying on
Yeah.
this thing. Um, but yeah, I don't have, my grandma had type 2 diabetes. My mom doesn't.
Did she ever, or did she
Nope.
reverse it? Oh, that's great.
Because
Yeah.
I went vegan and she did also, right? I
Yeah.
showed her, I was, sharing with her everything I was learning. I was like, yo, look at this book. Can you believe it? And she also was like, wow, so she made changes, you know?
I do the same. Yeah. I showed my mom some videos and, showed her some books to read
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah.
And,
And so it's not in our experience, it's not genetic, from the
yeah.
stories I hear, even if you have the genes, because I teach on brain health, right? The
Mhm.
APOE4 gene. If you have a parent that has it, then you're more likely to end up with Alzheimer's, dementia,
Right.
right?
Right.
If you have two parents, you're even greater likelihood, right? However, just like all these other genes, these you turn them on based on your lifestyle, your diet and
Yep.
your lifestyle.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
that stuff is just an indicator to tell you, okay, you get tested, whatever. Okay, I have this thing. Okay, so I have to be really intentional about living a brain healthy lifestyle to avoid getting this. And
Yep.
it just so happens that it's very similar to a cardiovascular healthy lifestyle, to everything else healthy
Exactly.
lifestyle.
Covers everything.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we are eating our species specific diet. If you don't eat what's meant for your body to eat, you will end up with problems,
Yep.
and that's really what is happening with most chronic disease. That's the deal.
Right. I wanted to ask you because I know you're mostly raw, and I've done raw challenges, and I do highly recommend it to people. But
Mhm.
what made you focus on raw at first? I mean, or did you become, more plant-based first, or and then raw, or was it raw from the beginning?
And no, I went vegan first. And then I noticed I was gaining weight. I actually at the time ballooned to the biggest. I say balloon, and I've worked with folks who've, are dealing with a lot more excess fat to lose. But at the time, it was the biggest I had ever been. And it's at the top of what the medical establishment, they have these height and weight charts of what's healthy weight, overweight, obese, and all this. It was the top of, for me, for my height. And so I'm 5'3" and I hit 140. And before I was always around 120.
Mhm.
That 20-pound weight gain was from bread, pasta, I was doing, I was looking back at some old videos I posted on YouTube, and it helped me remember I was doing the Daiya cheeses, because Daiya cheeses had come out 2008. That's when I started my vegan journey. So
Yeah.
the Daiya was out, the Tofurkey was out. So I
So all the vegan
definitely,
junk food. Yeah.
yeah, I played around with that, but I was never really into it because my mom, when I was younger, she did make tofu sometimes. And she loves to tell people, like, I had it one time, and it was fine, but subsequent times after, it would always make my stomach sick. And so when I went vegan and I was trying these things, it was like an experiment. It was never really a staple. I just
Mhm.
tried them. But my staple really was bread and pasta because I didn't like vegetables. So I had almond butter jelly sandwiches all the time. I had pasta all the time,
Yeah.
and it was those things in particular that had me gain all that weight. And so I got to 140. And again, I told you, motivated by fear. I saw,
Yeah.
I remember how big my grandma's stomach was. I did not want to put myself in a position to have to deal with it getting out of hand. You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
And so that's when I started, I was aware of raw foods, right? Because Cafe Gratitude was nearby and we used to go there. But that, when I had the weight gain, is when I started to be more intentional about incorporating more raw fruits and vegetables, started diving into the recipe books. I got Annie Fio's raw book, and Marna, I think her name is, or Sarma from Pure Food and Wine. She had a restaurant in New York. She had a raw recipe book. And I basically started with green smoothies, and because I was trying to get myself to like vegetables, thinking that if I ate more vegetables and I ate more raw foods, then I could lose this weight without not eating, right? Because I've always loved food, you know, and dieting is not something I've ever done. Like, I've never thought to diet ever, you know. I like to eat. And so,
well, I did try to diet, but then again, I was 150 pounds overweight. So that's a different story.
Yeah. And this is
I love
me.
Food too.
This is also me back then. So since then, you know, I've learned different things. Right now, I don't only utilize raw foods to keep my weight under control, but I also utilize intermittent fasting for that. Plus the fact that I'm a glutton and I can go out of hand with all the things, you know, like there's always room in my stomach for more, you know. So with this, the intermittent fasting just helps me keep some guardrails on that.
Exactly.
But at the time, I wasn't, you know, I didn't know anything about intermittent fasting, didn't know, like, I just wanted to eat all the time, and I didn't want anybody to tell me anything different. And but I didn't want to gain the weight, and raw foods had the promise of eating all the foods you want, you know, all the fruits and everything, and not gain weight. And so I did that, and it did help me. It helped me a lot.
Did you lose 20 pounds on that right away?
I got back to my normal weight. I don't know, because at the time I wasn't tracking it that much. I just needed to see me go in a reverse direction, and I was. And then, so I was in the Bay Area for 2.5 years. So this is the time now, like 2008, I became vegan. And you could say like the first, because that was like, I got there, like, let's say I graduated May, got there around mid-May, became vegan June. And so it was a journey. So 2009 now to 2010 was just me experimenting with all this stuff, getting more into raw foods and all that. And then my husband and I had the idea to open up a raw vegan juice bar in Chicago. And so we moved 2010 to Chicago and opened up the store. At that time, 2010, now we are preparing, right? Business plan, looking for the space, all this stuff. And 2010, 2011 is when I was more of the 95, 99% raw, you know, those beginning years in Cold Chicago. And it's funny because people say, like, how can you do raw in the winter? And when I was in Chicago, I was more raw in the winter, like, with a yearning in my body. And I think it's because it was so dark and cold. Like, my body just needed sunshine through the fruits and vegetables. It was intuitive, you know, it wasn't anything like, oh, I have to be, because I never put that type of restriction. Like I never had this whole, I have to, you know. It was more, I've always played games with myself. In college, it was like, okay, I need to drink more water. How can I rig my brain so I get more water? And I figured that out. You know, it's kind of more like setting up habits. I've never had this like, I have to be like with my food, you know. And so, but I just, because Chicago is the first time I've ever heard about and experienced seasonal depression. Even though I'm born and raised in New York, Queens, New York, we have winters, but nothing like Chicago.
Really, never
Chicago
been
is a
there, so
whole nother beast.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Yes, it is like
I can
10
imagine
degrees
it is. Yeah.
colder at
Wow.
any given moment. Yeah. And but yeah, so I got down to 115 pounds from the combination of the raw foods and also my lifestyle at the time with the store. Because
Yeah.
at the early part of the store, it was just my husband and I. So it was boots on the ground,
Yeah. Yeah.
doing all the things, washing the dishes, catering to the customers, loading up produce into the fridge, lifting up 40-pound boxes
A
of
lot of
celery
work.
and bananas. Yes. So you're standing up for the day, and you're lifting up this stuff. So you're using muscles. I hardly had time to go to any gym. I didn't have like a membership or anything. But later on, as the store, matured and we expanded and we had team members, I did go to the gym, a few times a week. It wasn't like crazy, but just, at that point too, when we grew and we started doing deliveries again, like I wasn't sitting down in front of a computer all day. So I was
Yep.
active, um, what they would consider lightly active, but the lightly active lightly active. It's hard to even tell lightly active versus moderately when your job is so physically demanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
But with that and the raw foods, the way I was eating, 115. And so according to the medical charts, for my height, 110 to 140 is considered healthy. I don't think I would ever like to see me drop to 110. See, so that's why I like too, in the beginning, when I started raw foods, I counted calories because I did not want to get too skinny. I didn't want to, in my culture, having flesh on the body is celebrated. Like it's literally in the music, in soca music, calypso, carnival time comes, you want something to flash and shake, So I never wanted to be, I just did not want to be unhealthy.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Yeah. So I bet you're like me, 'cause I don't even, we probably have it down to a science because I don't even need to count really. I know what foods to eat and it just works. I stay the same weight range. And I'm sure you're the same way. You're not obsessing over calories either, right?
Well, for me, it's a little different because I'm a woman. I have hormonal changes every month, and I'm 36, almost 37 in a few days. So,
Oh, happy early birthday.
Thank you. Eventually perimenopause, is going to be a thing. And because of these hormonal fluctuations, there are weight fluctuations. But in terms of me understanding how my body responds, yes. At the same time, if I'm not following intermittent fasting, which I don't all the time, it's more of like a 80-20, because it's too much to explain. Even with intermittent fasting, especially when it comes to women, it's a little different compared to men just because of our hormones and things like this. But what I've noticed is, like, even with exercise, there's certain exercises that will make me gain weight, because when the body is under chronic stress and you're at it, like there's like HIIT, for example, it's a stressor to the body. And if your body's constantly under chronic stress, whether it be from work, from hormones or whatever, you will notice things not go in the right direction. So I remember when I started to take up running, I gained weight with that. My diet didn't change, but I gained weight. And it was the running, it was the stress. I had to ease back. I had to do more yoga, I had to do more restorative yoga, so things like that. And then right now I'm running this summit. So the Thrive Through Food Summit is coming up. I've been in a launch. Usually when I'm launching a summit, there's a lot of anxiety that comes up. It's really stressful, all this work, all this tech. And so it's been an emotional roller coaster, just like the last time I ran it. I ran a summit, not the same one. And it makes it harder for me to stick to an intermittent fasting schedule. So I tend to eat more. And if I'm not eating all the greens I need to be eating, that means I'm eating more calorie heavy foods, and I'm sitting at my computer more because I'm doing a project that's intensive for, so it's like, I'm in the same boat as everyone else. I'm I have to be diligent about doing this like all the time. And yet there are times where even I fall off, and I wouldn't even consider it a fall off, because I think language is really important. Terminology is really important, because it's not like I've left my commitment to my health, but there are certain days you wake up and you decide to prioritize certain things, which means other things are being deprioritized. And so it's been a journey for me to always keep myself and my body number one. Sometimes it slips to number 2 or number 3. And that's where you could have things like this. The weight fluctuation, though, for me is not drastic. I'm not getting to 140 and beyond, thank God, because the foods that I'm eating are so water rich and fiber rich. But you know, it can fluctuate. And for women, 5-pound fluctuation is not a big deal, you know, so.
Right. Now, I'm just curious, I'm sure you feel differently about vegetables now. You said in the beginning you didn't like them. So
Yeah.
are there certain favorites now that you have?
Oh, yes. My relationship with vegetables has drastically changed.
I'm sure it has.
Like, I swore before I did not like avocados. I had never tried an avocado, but I swore I didn't like it. And now I love avocado.
Yep.
My favorite vegetable is kale. I can eat kale by itself. But kale with avocado, I'm telling you, is the bomb.com. It doesn't even need seasoning, you know?
I agree.
Brussels sprouts. I eat everything just about now. Everything.
Do you eat Brussels sprouts raw? Because I always boil them.
Okay, so I have had Brussels sprouts raw, and it's definitely a stronger taste than cooked. My favorite way to have it, just for flavor, is roasted, just because, you know, the flavors just marinate into it. But when you have it raw, the trick is you got to cut it up real fine, so it's bite-sized pieces and manageable. And there are different ways to do it too. Like the last recipe I did, I didn't like have it marinating in any vinegar or lemon or anything like, you know, acidic to break it down overnight. So it was really, it had a nice chew to it, you know, and it had a really pungent, like strong flavor. But yeah, you can't eat it raw.
Yeah. And another question I have is, I know a few people who want to try going raw, and I'm wondering, what does your program work like? I imagine you walk people through the best approaches on your website.
Yes. So basically, so I'm a coach. I'm an integrative nutrition coach. I do not force anyone to do what they don't want to do, right? So the first thing we do when we start coaching is set up a goal. What exactly are you looking to achieve? And most of the time with my clients, they want to release excess fat, right? 9 times out of 10. That's why they're coming to me. And they feel like raw foods is the vehicle to help them do that, which I agree. Raw food, that's exactly how I use raw foods. Raw foods is a tool to keep, not only to reverse, to lose the excess fat, but to maintain a healthy weight. And so we start with that, because like that is, you know, the North Star is your goal. And so there's a lot of things you could do for a lot of health things you're trying to fix, but the path is dictated by the goal. And so with that being said, some people come out of it and they're not necessarily 100% raw, but they're definitely eating more raw foods. Like everyone that I've worked with is eating more raw foods, but not everyone decides to be 100% raw. I don't think you need to be 100% raw, with an asterisk, right? So for folks who, I think that sustainability is really important. And that's what any good coach who's trained is always looking for. What is healthy for you to help you reach your goal that is also sustainable. So after working together, you're able to maintain this without any issues, right? Which is why you don't want to force anybody, because if you're telling someone to do something, it's not coming from them,
Yeah,
it's not going to stick, right?
exactly.
There are folks who are able to stay on 100% raw and do it in a manner that they love. So like there are folks who love to do high fruit, you know, and that vibes with them. There are folks who like to do more high fat, so a lot of raw gourmet stuff with seeds and nuts and things. And that vibes with them. Now for me, high raw has been my sweet spot. It's like, you know, when we're talking about Brussels sprouts, I don't have to give up Brussels sprouts the way I like it. You know, I like it
Right,
roasted, you know,
right.
with I can eat it raw, but I love it roasted, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I don't have to give that up high raw. I still get in my raw foods and I still get to eat my roasted Brussels sprouts, you know?
Nice.
So
Yeah,
it's like, it's a good balance of maintenance. The way I was
sure.
eating when I got to 115, I was eating that way, not because I was forcing myself, was because my whole life revolved around the store, you know, and that's
Yep.
what we offered. So I was eating the food available from the store. I started my day with a green juice because I didn't have time to sit down. And the green juice made me feel full and satisfied. It's like the difference between when you eat a meal and you get full physically in your stomach and when you feel full cellularly, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not hungry, you feel satisfied, you know? That's
Right,
what
right.
the green juice did for me. And this, in a particular one that we had called My Body is Alkaline, that had cucumber and lemon and ginger. It was just like perfect. And so that's how I would
Yep.
start my day. I would go out, do deliveries to some spas that we were servicing, come back, I'd have a smoothie because I don't have time to sit down. So I get the smoothie and I'm probably on the register for a while or doing whatever, walking around, doing whatever it is I need to do in the store. And then dinner was a salad. We had, you know, and the salads we had that was my favorite, was green healing salad, was a kale salad with a cashew dressing.
Yep.
And then by the time I get home, you know, maybe I might have a raw apple pie that we make from the store that I grab and have that, which is just apples, walnuts,
Yeah, that
dates.
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so I'm done, and all I want to do is lay down and sleep, you know, because I've had a long day, you know.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
wasn't forcing myself. The environment just provided, you know, it was just natural for me to eat it because my whole life revolved around the store. That's what we offered. That's what I ate. Now, for folks that I work with who are busy professionals, they have office jobs, or maybe they're social workers, they're in the car all the time. It has to look a little different. My mom worked in a salon, you know, so she did her thing a little different. She didn't have time to sit down and take a lunch, especially on Saturdays when the salon is really busy, you know, so she would bring smoothies in her cooler bag, and then she would put it in the fridge. And so she would have smoothies through the day, and
Yep.
then snack on nuts. She loves almonds, you know. So it's really individual. It's like, what do you
It
love?
is. I agree. Yeah.
You know, what makes sense for you? As long as we are getting more water and more fiber in the diet, excess fat is going to roll off. You know, you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you just want to intuitively eat. And that's like, I feel, the way our ancestors basically ate. Food was
Sure.
nourishment to keep the body going, to do what you needed to do to
Exactly.
survive in
To
this life.
survive. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have a few other questions. First is there any particular success story you're proud of with coaching? I mean, obviously you don't have to give their name, but if there's one certain story that stands out.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited, you know, with helping folks reverse type 2 diabetes, you know, in particular, I remember um a series that I did back in 2020, and that time was really, really rough for me. There was a lot going on in the world.
I know.
um and I did a launch. I was doing a series called Enjoy Sweet Foods and Reverse Type 2 Diabetes or something. And everyone was so engaged. And, you know, it was
Nice.
just,
Yeah.
it was just so happy to share, like, you don't have to give up. Like, you don't, you can give into your cravings, enjoy good food, and still be healthy. Like, you, it's not a sacrifice, you know? And we had some great testimonials come out of that where people were just super excited, you know, and just making changes, you know, folks in really precarious, traumatic living situations, you know, who were able to make change for themselves. And
Mhm.
in, whereas, like, you know, who would share that with them, you know? Because
Yeah.
in some parts of our community, the things that we're talking about in the plant-based world online, it's not reaching them. And I've gone through the struggle of trying to figure out why. Like, you know, don't we all have access to computers and internet? Which actually, no, I learned a lot when I went to LA, and I lived in LA working on food policy and all sorts of stuff, and working in community development. 40% of the people in Watts in LA, South LA, this is a big city,
Yeah.
don't have computers, don't have internet access. They do their schoolwork on phones. They go to McDonald's to get internet. You know what I'm
Wow.
saying?
Yeah. You don't even think about that, but yeah, it's
You
sad.
don't. It's
Yeah.
like, this is America. Are you
Yeah.
serious? You know? And this is, so it's like, we have to be really flexible and open in how we think about this work, because when you live online, you think everybody knows this, you know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not true. I've, even when we had the store, one of our customers invited us to talk at this school called Ombudsman, which is like, it's a school for young people who didn't finish high school for whatever reason, and they're able to go to this school to get their GED. And we were talking about, you know, healthy foods, and you should be eating this, organic, and all this. And one of the students was like, you talking all this stuff, I can't even get those ingredients at my local grocery. And I'm like, what do you mean, you know? Meanwhile,
Yeah.
at the time, I'm shopping at Whole Foods. You know, honestly, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
in my own wellness bubble, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's when I first got the crack out of it. But I honestly, I felt like, oh, you're not looking in the right places, you know? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you know, I had made a goal in my head to come back to the neighborhood to look around. But when we left that talk and I was looking at the neighborhood, I'm like, oh, and even in New York, you know, you would think in New York, of course, everybody has access to everything. That's not the case.
Yeah.
My mom
Yeah.
lives in Queens Village. That's where I was born and raised. Getting organic, impossible. You have to leave the neighborhood to get organic. You know,
Yeah.
you have to leave the neighborhood.
Yep.
And she struggles a lot with this. And organic is super important. Why? Because we have a lot of us dying of cancer. It's the chemical overload, and not just cancer too, but it also affects our hormonal levels. The chemicals affect our whole endocrine system. It's the endocrine disruptors, and how this affects our insulin and type 2 diabetes rates, we haven't fully enough, I think, dove into that
I
aspect.
agree. Yeah.
We have research to know that even toxic air can affect insulin levels in the body. But you know, this is a huge issue. What we're able to have access to is the produce quality, you know, and are there nuts and seeds to make some of these raw dishes, you know, because not
Yep.
everyone can do such a simple raw as where I'm at now.
Hmm.
The way I eat is very simple. I've been making more transitional stuff to help some of my clients, you know, just kind of get into raw foods. Cause like at the
Yep.
beginning of my journey, I went to Cafe Gratitude and different restaurants for stuff like this.
Right.
Even when we
Right.
went to Chicago, there was a lot of raw, there was Karen's Raw, Cousins Incredible Vitality, some of these other places doing raw gourmet, you know?
Yeah.
So I got that experience, and I want to share that with my people as well, because it does help to show the full scope of it, that you're not just eating, you know, leaves, you know, as people think,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah, I know.
but
Exactly.
eventually you get to a place where like you prefer just the leaves, you know, you just
Yeah.
prefer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had many interactions with people, even a call I had today, you know, just sharing the power of how much fruits and vegetables can cure, you
Yeah.
know?
Exactly. exactly. So I
Yeah.
just have two other questions. The first, I hope it's not too tough for you. It's about your grandmother, and I know it's an emotional topic. But I'm wondering how you feel about if she had known the knowledge back then. How do you think things would have been different if she had known back then what Neil Barnard was talking about? And
Yeah, well, we were in control of her meals. So I fully believe that we would have taken action and she would have lived a longer life, definitely.
yeah,
Definitely a longer life, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Whether or not, because at that point, like I'm just thinking today, like if I was able to work with her, um, her stomach would have went down. She would have been weaned off of all those medications. Her type 2
yeah,
diabetes would have been reversed. So then at that point, she has more mobility. With more mobility, she would have more freedom to move
yeah,
around and make her own choices. And so now at that point now is where a lot of my clients end up after coaching,
yeah, yeah,
they're good. I've had
yeah,
a client who reversed type 2 diabetes and then went to eating stuff that we talked about, probably not the best, but
yeah,
he's in the clear, he doesn't have
yeah,
it, but that's the thing. It's like, this is a lifestyle. Like if I ate the way I used to eat, I would for sure be walking myself into type 2 diabetes.
I
I
know,
was
me
already
too.
on
Yeah,
that road, I
and I
had
was
signs.
pre-diabetic, so I
Yeah,
know I would have
exactly.
been too. Yeah,
Yeah, I had
yeah,
signs of insulin resistance, with my crazy cravings, mood swings. If I don't eat every 2-3 hours, just like being like feeling like I was gonna die. You know what I'm
mhm,
saying?
yeah.
Which
And I
meant
had
that,
neuropathy too, which I ignored too. You know,
wow.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'm just so grateful for this lifestyle. That we can get better. And
Yeah.
I really think your story is so inspiring because it's just awesome that you're able to help people. I love that. I mean, your grandmother really helped you, open up your eyes to, the health consequences of, you know, being on meds, and you saw what was happening to her and really made a difference for other people.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
yeah, so I really love your story, and I know my audience will too.
Thanks. And I want to underscore too that I just make people aware.
Yeah,
That's my
that's
goal,
the
is
important thing.
awareness, is that
Exactly.
the informed consent that may not be happening at the doctor's office, hopefully you're getting connected with me in one way, shape, or form, or someone else in the field to just see what's possible. The
Exactly.
actual change, though, happens with you at home in your life, because no
Yeah.
one can jump in your body and make you eat a certain way, right?
Exactly.
We're
Exactly.
all individually on this journey. Like I mentioned, like I am coaching myself every day, when it comes to health, and
Yeah.
so it's an everyday thing. It's just a lifestyle thing because we're living in a toxic food environment
Yeah.
and under really unnatural circumstances in terms of the way we live and work and are able to take care of ourselves and our family. It's quite
Exactly.
unnatural to be this sedentary, to be in front of computer screens as much as we are, to be as disconnected as we've been, especially since the pandemic,
Right.
So
Right.
there's a lot of things, I'm an integrative nutrition coach. I look at the whole body system, and a lot of the things that are non-food feeds into our habits with food. And so I just want to highlight that part. That's why, like, I'm
Yeah.
the testimonials that I love are how folks' minds open up to possibility because the work happens with them ongoing,
Yeah. Yeah.
not just in the
Definitely.
coaching program, but years after,
Absolutely.
how you're
Yeah.
able to maintain.
Absolutely. So can you let our viewers know how they can find you, and yeah, your podcast, tell them about that as well.
Yes, my site is rawfoodmealplanner.com. My podcast is the Raw Food Health Empowerment Podcast. And right now we have the Thrive Through Food Summit that's going to be launching October 30th, available for free viewing October 30th through November 1st, looking at nutrition's role on mental health. And yeah, those are all the places you can find me on social media, Raw Food Meal Planner, on Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X, Raw Food Meal Plan. But yeah, on YouTube, Samantha Salmon. So yeah.
Great. This is a wealth of knowledge, and I truly appreciate it. And again, I'm so inspired by your story.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.